the quiet hero of Bedford Avenue. At 67 years old, Clarence Clay Darby was a familiar shadow on the streets of Brooklyn. He moved like a ghost through the neighborhoods near Bedford Avenue, quiet, unobtrusive, always with that same olive-drab military backpack strapped to his back. It was fraying at the edges, the canvas dulled from years of exposure, but he carried it like it still meant something. To him, it probably did. Most people never bother to ask, unlike others in the unhoused community who might panhandle or draw attention. Clay kept to himself. He picked up cans and bottles, recycling for spare change. Sometimes kind-hearted restaurant workers slipped him leftovers foil-wrapped hope passed in silence. At night, he chose doorways with deep alcoves or loading docks out of the wind, always careful not to become a problem for any single business. He never stayed in shelters. Too loud, too chaotic, too many memories. What people didn't know was that Clay had worn a uniform for over 20 years. He was a retired U.S. Army Staff Sergeant, honorably discharged in 2005. He'd served 3 tours, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Logistics and support, mostly. Clay made sure convoys had what they needed. He'd been in a few hairy spots, survived ambushes, and even got a medal or 2 he no longer carried. After his wife, Marlene, died in 2009, taken by cancer, the VA doctors had initially brushed off as benign. Clay unraveled. He'd given up their tiny 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, donated the proceeds to her favorite hospice center, and walked away from civilian life entirely. No forwarding address, no contact with family, just disappeared into the city, where it was easier to be invisible than to be a man who felt like he'd failed the only person he'd ever truly loved. One brutal November morning, the temperature dipped into the 20s and snow clouds threatened the skyline. Clay hadn't eaten in 3 days. His hands shook as he stepped into Garibaldi's Market on Fulton Street. He waited until the owner, Mr. Garibaldi, was helping a customer near the deli counter. Then, Clay quietly slipped a stale loaf of ciabatta into his coat. He didn't move fast. He wasn't trying to run. He was just hungry. "Hey, mister," Garibaldi barked, spotting the movement in a security mirror. "Put that back. I'm calling the cops." Clay didn't argue, didn't plead. He just stood there, the bread peeking out from his unzipped coat. "I just need enough strength to make it one more day," he said softly. 2 NYPD officers arrived in minutes. The younger one, Officer Pena, looked uncomfortable as he placed handcuffs on Clay's frostbitten wrists. "You really a vet?" Pena asked, eyeing the worn dog tags hanging around Clay's neck. Clay nodded. "Used to be someone who mattered," he said. "Not anymore." "The owner's pressing charges," Pena said, almost apologetically. "Says this isn't the first time." Clay was processed at the 88th Precinct, like any other petty thief. The public defender assigned to him spent less than 5 minutes reviewing his case. His court date was scheduled for the next morning, just a preliminary hearing to decide if he'd be held before trial. In court, Clay shuffled in, still wearing the same layers from the day before, threadbare and wrinkled. No family came. No one sat in the gallery for him. Just a few reporters, board interns, and lawyers waiting for more sensational cases. Case number 87 to 992, the State versus Clarence Darby, the clerk called out. The prosecutor, a fresh-faced assistant DA named Andrew Klein, stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant was apprehended stealing a loaf of bread. Given his prior record and lack of fixed address, the state recommends continued detention until trial." Judge Edward Hallbrook glanced at the file. He was known for his efficiency, not his empathy. "Mr. Darby, how do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor," Clay answered, his voice hoarse. Someone in the back snorted. "Clarence Anthony Darby, former Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army," the judge read aloud. His voice caught slightly. He looked up sharply, blinking. The courtroom grew still. Hallbrook reread the name, the file in his hand trembling slightly. "Court will recess for 15 minutes, he said abruptly, standing in unusual move for such a routine hearing. In his chambers, Judge Hallbrook pulled open a drawer and retrieved an old photo. It showed a group of soldiers standing in front of a supply truck in Iraq, dusty and smiling. He zoomed in on one tall figure at the back. Darby, he whispered. 2 decades ago, Holbrook had been a combat medic. In 2003, near Fallujah, his unit had come under heavy fire. He remembered being wounded, dragging himself into a ditch, bleeding out. A soldier had thrown him over his shoulder and carried him nearly 2 miles through hostile territory. That soldier had only given a name in the chaos. Darby. The judge opened a secure VA database, still accessible through his advisory role. There was Staff Sergeant Clarence Darby, Bronze Star recipient, injured during a convoy ambush, saved 17 lives, carried a medic private first class Edward Holbrook to safety. My God, the judge whispered. He picked up the phone. Colonel Jensen, this is Judge Holbrook. I found him. In the courtroom, Clay sat motionless, unaware. For 15 years, he'd lived on the edge of society. No one had looked twice. He was the man kids laughed at, store owners chased away, and neighbors crossed the street to avoid. The recess ended. Holbrook returned, his demeanor transformed. In light of new information regarding the defendant's background, this court will delay proceedings until tomorrow morning. The prosecutor blinked, confused. Clay nodded without reaction. But that evening, something changed. A local blog picked up the court filing, "Homeless man claims to be decorated Army vet." Comments flooded in, skepticism, vitriol, some sympathy. In the holding facility, a young inmate confronted Clay after seeing the article. "Stolen valor is disgusting," he spat, pushing Clay into a wall. Clay didn't fight back. He simply held onto his dog tags and Marlene's photo. The next morning, Clay was escorted back to a courtroom now filled to capacity. Reporters waited outside. He was stunned to see he had a new Layera well-dressed man who introduced himself as Miles Rendell from the Veterans Legal Advocacy Group. "Someone high up took an interest," Rendell said. The courtroom hushed as 3 military officers in full dress entered and sat behind the prosecution table. Then came Colonel Jensen himself, gray-haired but sharp-eyed, who took the stand. Staff Sergeant Darby saved 17 soldiers during an ambush, he testified, including Private Holbrook. No, Judge Holbrook. Gasps filled the room. The judge's eyes reddened. "Your Honor," the colonel continued, "Darby's VA benefits were terminated due to a clerical error in 2009. He's owed over $240,000 in back payments, as well as lifelong medical coverage." The judge turned to Clay. "I didn't recognize you yesterday," Holbrook said, "but you carried me when I couldn't walk. You gave me back my life." Clay's voice cracked. "I was just doing my job." "No, you were doing more than that. And now it's our turn." The prosecutor stood. "The state moves to dismiss all charges with prejudice." "So ordered," the judge said. Reporters rushed to capture the moment. A woman in her 30s stepped forward, tears running down her cheeks. "Uncle Clay," she said, "I'm Nicole Marlene's niece. We've been looking for you." She wrapped him in a hug. He broke for the first time. Over the next 48 hours, a fund was established in Clay's name. Donations poured in. By the end of the week, it reached $250,000. The VA launched a national review of terminated benefits. At a press conference, Judge Holbrook stood beside Clay as a citizen, not a judge. "We failed him," he said, "but we don't have to keep failing others." 6 months later, Clay moved into a quiet apartment in Veterans Haven, a supportive community near Prospect Park. He kept the space simple. A few framed photos, his medals newly polished, and Marlene's smile watching from the nightstand. He spoke at schools, mentored at-risk teens, and in Sundays had dinner with the Holbrook family. At a Veterans Day ceremony, Clay stood in uniform. "I protected this country," he said into the microphone. "And after a long wait, it protected me back." Behind him, a bronze plaque bore his image and an inscription. "Justice is remembering those we once forgot."